Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Uninterrupted. I'm your host, Chris Hammonds, and with me today is John Fausz. John, say hello.
Hi, everybody.
All right, we got a really good one for you today, and as always, we're going to get right into it. So, we all remember Harry Truman and his very classic line, or quote, I should say, or phrase, "The buck stops here," right? But I want to talk about something a little bit more recently. Rick Pitino, you remember him?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, back in 2010, between 2010 and 2013, Rick was a basketball coach for the University of Louisville, and he was fired. And the reason behind that was because his recruiting team was violating some NCAA rules. And basically, although they were unable to prove that he had any involvement with that, he was the one that was let go, right? So, and then according to basketballnetwork.net, he actually made this quote: "Looking back on it now, I deserve to be fired by Louisville. Was I innocent for any wrongdoing? Yes. But I was the leader and I deserve to be fired. I need to move on, and that's what I probably have learned the most." So a college basketball coach, you know, in Rick's situation, was he the one physically doing that and bribing players or whatever the case may be? Maybe, maybe not. But when the program was found that it was violating rules, they had no other decision but to fire the head coach. So, John, I must ask you a question. What's the difference? Why is that any different than what's going on in cybersecurity?
Yeah, so first of all, as a University of Kentucky basketball fan, all I can say is karma. Ooh. You know, for going to a rival school after leaving UK. But, you know, all jokes aside there, realistically, what this is saying is that even if you weren't the one that's doing the questionable behavior, or you weren't doing the one that directly was impacted by this, that you as the leader, you were the person who set the tone for the entire organization. You should have spotted this and stopped that sort of thing. And I see this happening all the time in cybersecurity. Is we'll talk to business owners, business leaders, and because it's something that they don't understand, it's something that they don't feel like they want to understand or need to understand, that they just say, hey, I have a guy that takes care of this, and they don't realize how impactful it is for their business, what it actually means for their business. They oftentimes don't realize what they're actually saying, and they don't understand that if a cyber event happens or any significant downtime happens, that they're going to be the ones that are holding the bag and holding the bill. And when we talk about the buck stops here, that's exactly what that means. Is this is a form of passing the buck and saying it's somebody else's responsibility to do that. At the end of the day, generally the person who is responsible is the business owner. Sometimes it's other people in the business leadership team that are responsible. They're the ones that are going to be stuck dealing with this scenario after all the dust clears.
So let me ask you this. What's the big difference between involvement and accountability with a cyber incident?
Yeah, so really, so you can say, hey, accountability comes from who actually has the authorization to be finally the one who's accountable for this sort of thing. You know, if you say, hey, we sent this over to my IT guy, he's the one that's accountable for this. Well, is that IT guy going to continue being at your organization? Is he somebody that can be sued? Is he somebody that's going to have the actual monetary responsibility of dealing with this? Is he somebody who the law is going to come after if there was any kind of sensitive data that was stolen, if there was any kind of law breaking that took place in this scenario? Normally not. Normally it's the business leadership that gets wrapped up in that, and the business owner, because I've seen this a ton of times after somebody goes through a cyber event. We've had multiple companies call us after they've been hacked. They weren't clients before. Right. Very, 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 very rarely is that IT person there who was technically responsible for that hack, or the person that was involved in that hack. And I say responsible loosely here in air quotes, because a lot of times that person didn't know. They haven't done the training. They haven't done all the things necessary to know what they should be doing for cybersecurity anyways. But they're not with the organization anymore. Sometimes they're not there because they got fired or let go. A lot of times they're not there because they don't want to deal with this situation. They just move on to another company where they're not having to deal with it. And then everything gets left over. The responsibility gets left over to the business owners to actually clean this mess up and deal with it, and think about how they're going to keep their business running and how they're going to keep their business continuity going, while they're having to financially deal with, and the headache of dealing with this cyber incident. Plus, hey, now I don't have access to any of my technology, any of my computers, you know. And two of the cases that we've seen where this happened, they were down, both these companies were down for a solid week before they got even to a limp mode functionality. How do you keep your business running for a week when some of the core aspects that keep it functioning no longer work? That is not an IT discussion. That is not a cybersecurity discussion. That's a business operation. That's a business continuity that involves your COO, your CFO, your CEO, business leadership. And at the end of the day, really all those people can leave except for the CEO, or except for the actual person who owns the company. Somebody's going to be left holding the purse and holding the bag at the end of this and seeing what their company looks like at the end. And it might not be the same person that got them into the mess.
Yeah, and one of the things I hear an awful lot, and it's a lot of times it's usually in the construction space, but you know, I've had people, CEOs, business owners tell me that they don't even use a computer for anything. They've never touched it. They have never made a technical decision since they've owned the business. Would they're still going to be held responsible though, right? Yeah,
that's correct. And a lot of the times that these things have snuck up on these people to where they might not be benefiting from technology directly, but their company is. And so they've brought in somebody and like say, hey, we bring on Bill, and Bill's like a very good project manager in the construction space or whatever, and he keeps all of his team organized and able to do what they're doing. This business owner might not realize that Bill heavily relies on technology in order to do that. You know, a lot of times these happen organically where they pulled this off the shelf and this off the shelf and this off the shelf and this off the shelf, and they don't realize there's nobody putting together the entire picture for the organization and saying, hey, this is how this all works together holistically in order to have us complete our mission and do the job that we're wanting to do and deliver the goods and services and products, whatever have you, that they're delivering. And so I hear that a lot. I'll hear it from some of these business owners who maybe, you know, grew the company. It developed organically. They don't realize how much they rely on technology. I've had a person in the construction industry. We picked up one company because he wasn't worried about losing clients. He was, you know, he was pretty good with all that sort of stuff. What he was worried from a technology perspective is if they went through a hack, he really liked all of his employees. He wanted them to stay. If they went through a hack and he made his employees' lives harder by going back to pencil and paper, he knew that he would lose a certain amount of that staff. And that's regardless if you miss payroll or any of those sorts of things. You miss 2 payrolls, your whole staff's quitting. Like nobody's staying. So, but he was worried about, hey, if I make their lives harder and they can go to a competitor of mine and are able to do their jobs without the hardship operationally of moving out of technology and all those sorts of things, then he decided to invest in technology in order to keep his employees and make sure that they're happy.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this. Have you ever seen a situation where a business goes through a cyber incident and an insurer or vendor or you know, a customer goes and tries to reach back out to the IT company at that point?
Yeah, so what the insurance does is they want to recoup their money, right? So they want to go after anybody who A, may be responsible for this, or B, would be potentially liable for this. And so they really try to go after every single party involved. And so if you have an IT company that's outside of yours, they will go and look at that. And so because they want to recoup their money and they want to go after anybody that has money that can potentially do that. They'll also go after the business leaders and things like that. What we've seen, though, and we had a lot of hard conversations with people years ago with companies that we deal with, because it was, you're not doing enough for cybersecurity. Even though you're working with us, times have changed. Cyber threats are on the rise. Hacking is becoming more and more prevalent, and it's a direct risk to your organization now, because it used to be more for the enterprise, and the hackers have come down to the small, medium business, and they're looking at companies like you who aren't doing enough for cybersecurity. So we need to do more, and that's going to be more of an investment for you. We would go through and lay out the risks and show them what was really going on and show them how to increase their cybersecurity, knowing that it was going to cost more money, and that would be a very uncomfortable conversation with them. We had to do that with everybody because we couldn't just say, well, we know that XYZ company's not going to pay for it, so we're not even going to have the conversation because it'll be uncomfortable knowing that they can't pay for it. That's a business decision that I would have made for your company that I didn't allow you to make. You could have still said no and not wanted to invest in that, but then at the end of the day, if you went through a cyber event and the insurance came back or whoever came back to recoup money from that event and they say, hey, John, why didn't you tell them that they needed to do more for cybersecurity? I could say, well, we did, and they refused the coverage.
Right.
At that point, then the responsibility goes back to the business owner who says no, and they're going to look to go after them in order to recoup the money, because Forbes did our due diligence. We had the uncomfortable conversation, slayed out the risks, and we let them make a decision.
Gotcha. Now, what are some cybersecurity decisions that belong to just IT, and what are some decisions that belong more towards the business leadership side?
Yeah, I would say that IT's job and cybersecurity's job is to come up with the how do you accomplish these sorts of things, the actual nuts and bolts from doing these sorts of things. And the business owners need to understand the why and the outcomes that you're looking to do, because they don't need to be in the nuts and bolts to figure out exactly how you're going to accomplish these tasks, but they do need to have a high enough understanding to know the why, what are we trying to protect, and then know, like, at a very, very high level, kind of the general way that it's going to be accomplished. They don't need to know exactly how to set up an EDR or the Security Operations Center or things like that, but they do need to know we have these tool sets that are here in order to protect things, and this is what they're doing and how it's kind of wrapped around it. But they don't need to go down the rabbit hole of exactly how to configure it all and everything, but they do need to have a high level understanding of what are we looking to achieve, what outcomes are we looking to do here, and then how do we, in a very broad stroke, achieve those outcomes.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this. So can an IT team make that decision of how much risk a company is willing to accept?
I would say no.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't make that for one of my clients, right? I can give guidelines and recommendations, but at the end of the day, they need to make the decision about how much risk they want to carry. And we always talk about this from the 3 bad things pillars. So how do we stop them? The hackers want to go after money. There's 3 bad things that they're generally after. That is getting in the middle of a financial transaction or stealing financials directly, stealing sensitive data and blackmailing you for the release, or locking down your operations to where you consider paying a ransom, a good way to get your operations back up and running. Every single one of these companies have a different height of those 3 pillars. And then their cybersecurity program becomes what tool sets, what policies and procedures, what other kind of unsexy things of cybersecurity, which are just making sure everything's on everything and knowing what employees' responsibilities are, those sorts of things. That helps actually do the way that you're mitigating that risk. But how much risk does a business want to carry in each of those 3 things depends on a lot of factors. It depends on what do they do, what kind of data that they hold. Some of these risk decisions are already made for them if they have compliance considerations, or they have, hey, I keep data that would allow identity theft to happen for my people, like say you're a CPA firm or something like that. Then you have actually a legal responsibility due to FCC data safeguards and the safeguarding taxpayer data with the IRS to actually make sure that you're keeping these things to where there can be hefty fines or sometimes criminality that is associated with that sort of behavior. And so sometimes those decisions are made for them. But as any business decision, you're not letting a low-level employee, and a lot of times I consider IT to be kind of a relatively low-level employee when it actually has to do with the nuts and bolts of delivering an IT program. They're not a C-suite employee who's just, if they're the ones that are doing the work, they're not really a C-suite employee, right? So putting that in the hands of a lower-level employee, they might not even have the authorization, from a legal perspective within your organization to be able to make the decisions that you're telling them to make. I mean, you wouldn't wholesale let somebody go and open a new line of credit for you without your knowledge, right? If your building was filling up with gas, you wouldn't let somebody be like, that's somebody else's problem to figure out. No, you would be responsible as the business leader to make sure that was being taken care of so that you weren't putting your employees' lives in danger. Well, the same thing from an operation and a financial health perspective of your organization. Is your company's technology doing the equivalent of filling up with gas, and you're letting you're carrying a bunch of risk there and letting a lower level employee make those business risk decisions for you and just saying, no, I don't need to worry about it.
Yeah, and another way to look at that is, if I were to ask you, who's ultimately responsible for the cybersecurity budget? Who's responsible for deciding if we need to meet a certain level of compliance or if we need cyber insurance? I mean, it's that same person's going to be responsible for if they go through a cyber incident.
Yeah, it's a business leadership discussion, right? Yeah. That's not necessarily an IT only discussion. IT should inform that, cybersecurity should inform that, but somebody higher up in the organization, somebody at a really business leadership perspective, and depending on how large your organization is, that could be the owner, it could be a CFO, a COO, somebody like that that's in an actual decision-making role who has the authorization to do that kind of thing should be the one that's making it, because they're ultimately either they're outlaying financials, right, which is a risk to your organization to have a direct financial outlay in order to pay for something like insurance or things like that, or you have the reverse financial risk by not doing those things. Could you end up paying massively in the end if you go through a cyber event?
Gotcha. Okay. So Just an example. So if let's say I was going 75 in a 50, I get pulled over and I tell the cop I didn't know what the speed limit was, right? What happens when a business leader actually says something like that, where they didn't know how weak their security posture was? And does that help with anything?
Yeah, well, ignorance of a law doesn't mean that the law doesn't exist. Like, you still have to follow the laws even
Right.
if you don't know about the laws. And it's the same kind of thing with here. We hear a lot of times where it's kind of like it's out of sight, out of mind, or if I just stick my head in the sand a little bit, that I'm not actually responsible for this. But you still are. Like, you have a duty with the type of data that you obtain to actually protect it or not carry it at all. It just depends. Sometimes these are laid out for you in certain compliances, depending on different industries you work with. Sometimes they don't let you. Like, banking industry is heavily regulated from a cybersecurity perspective. So they're not going to let you do certain things with bank data and just be laissez-faire with it. Like, you have to actually protect it. We're seeing this more and more with things like FTC data safeguards, and we're seeing with CMMC from the manufacturing industry. Different bar associations are pushing things down to the lawyers. We're seeing it from the insurance requirements for cyber insurance. We're seeing it from everywhere, where it's just saying, hey, you can't just stick your head in the sand and not do anything about this. When you do go through an incident, you're going to end up reaping what you sow. And if you've sown, hey, I don't know anything about this, well, that is going to come back to harm you in a very large way if you do go through a cyber incident. Now, you're rolling the dice, right? You're rolling the dice, any of those sorts of things, and that's up to your thing to do so. But you're carrying undue risk that you don't necessarily need to have. You're carrying undue risk that can be very, very much so mitigated, if not completely removed, but can just have that blast radius of the cyber event happen be reduced greatly, so that you're really not affected as much, and you don't even have to go through any of these legal or compliance or regulatory headaches from going through a cyber event. It's going to be less likely to happen, and if one does happen, it's going to be less impactful for the business. And at the end of the day, that will be cheaper overall for you than having to go through one of these really catastrophic events and then rebuild from the ground up.
Gotcha. So let me ask you this. That's got me thinking. So what does good cybersecurity governance actually look like then?
Yeah, so governance is kind of the thing that's the new. It's existed. The enterprise world kind of knew about it. It's kind of coming down to the SMB market. It's a lot of from compliance where it looks like. But what it kind of is you figure out the why of what you're doing for cybersecurity. Why does your organization want to do cybersecurity? Do they have any requirements to do so? How does it fit in with the company ethos? And then governance is the piece that says, okay, is it actually doing the goal of those things? It's the how that it actually gets done. And so that's not just throwing a bunch of tool sets on things and hoping that they work. That's actually making sure the tools aren't everywhere, and that there's policies and procedures that come with this sorts of things, and making sure the employees know how they fit into this, and knowing what to do with a financial transaction, how to handle a wire transfer. If you have a new request for a payment gateway change, how do you do to vet out that that's legitimate? There's all these things that go into this that are not just, hey, we throw some antivirus software on there and we got a firewall and we're good. There's things that have to go with this that actually involve human behavior, and having humans trained to know what they should do when they come in contact with things that they shouldn't have. All these kinds of things, that's part of the governance. And the whole governance piece is to say, hey, how does this fit in with the organization as a whole? And then how do we execute that due to the different departments having different things that they need to do? That governance piece is not an IT or cybersecurity question wholesale. It involves all of the leadership team together, and the people that we work with that go through that exercise, they become better companies at the end of this because they have a better understanding of how their company functions overall, top to bottom, left to right, not just from a technology perspective, but how does money flow through the organization?
Absolutely.
How does data flow through the organization? How do we actually achieve what we're looking to achieve in our business? They have a better understanding of that, and they can make more targeted decisions. They're generally more profitable. They're definitely more operationally mature, and they're better companies at the end of the day.
Gotcha. And we've talked about kind of the CEO roles, business owner roles, but another thing I hear a lot are your next level, your CFOs, your COOs, And oftentimes, too, that they seem to try to pass that buck along and say, no, we have this person handling this, I stay away from that. How should they be involved? How or why should they be involved in a cyber incident, or just cybersecurity in general?
Yeah, so it kind of depends on what your COO or CFO does, right? So a lot of times the COO will wear a lot of different hats. I wear a lot of different hats here. I'm not just in charge of operations, but I'm in charge of a lot of different things in Forbes, and I have different heights of sorts of things. The operational pillar of the 3 pillars is really under my purview. If you go to a classic, like if it's just chief operations officer, like that operations pillar is mine.
Yeah.
You know, and so anything that has to do with technology that allows that pillar to function is ultimately still partially my oversight, that I need to make sure it's functioning correctly and doing all those sorts of things. From a CFO perspective, very similar too. The financial pillar is yours. That also includes the cybersecurity budget, understanding what cybersecurity risks you hold, understanding how cybersecurity and technology works within your organization, to understand, are you budgeting enough for the defense of this sort of thing? Are you prepared to handle incidents? Are you prepared to stop fraud from happening in other aspects of things? And so really, it's not just about making sure the books are correct and doing all those sorts of things. It's about making sure that you're not losing money in other aspects of the business, that you're operationally good, that you're efficient, that you're profitable. All those kinds of things are part of cybersecurity and IT influence.
Gotcha. So I'm going to ask you a tough one here. So if our business were to be shut down tomorrow due to a ransomware event, who do you think customers are going to blame? Do you think they're going to be trying to reach out to you first, or do you think they're going to go after maybe James, the president?
Yeah, I mean, James is it's Forbes, right? Like, he's the name on the building. Like, ultimately, at the end of the day, he's the one that's responsible for making sure that the cybersecurity was right and all those sorts of things. When we look at, do I have an IT guy make cybersecurity decisions, going back to that kind of one?
Right.
Well, you know, in our case, yes, an IT guy makes cybersecurity decisions and business leadership decisions because James is an IT guy and he's the owner. But he still doesn't do that in a vacuum. We have peer groups that we look at. We have different people in our industry, pillars of our industry. We have partners that we work with to make sure that we're doing the right things in our due diligence and keeping up with the cyber threats. You know, most of the companies that we work with, really, the IT person isn't a high enough employee. If they have an internal IT person, they're not a high enough employee that would have the authority to make that kind of decision. They're not the person who's going to be left holding the purse whenever there's a financial risk to the organization due to the downtime that comes after going through a cyber incident, or the money, the cash outlay that gets spent to just fix it and respond and recover and remediate that situation from those aspects. And so really the business leadership are the people who the customers are going to end up going after. They're the ones who the employees are going to go after. They're the ones who are going to be responsible for this. And guys, I've never seen a case where I've seen hands-off business owners. I've seen hands-on business owners from IT. We've had people call us after they've gone through cyber events. After the people that call us that we haven't worked with that go through cyber events, every single one of those business owners is hands-on at that point. They want to know, how do we make this so this never happens again?
Yeah, no one wants to go through that.
Nobody wants to go through it after they've been through it because they felt the pain of it. So people either say, hey, it's not going to happen to me, and somebody else takes care of it, and then they go through one and they don't want to go through it again. But that's really a factor of, you know, now they understand that they needed to be involved in this from the get-go, and they didn't realize that in the past.
Yeah, I mean, so let me ask you this. How often have you seen instances where an IT company may be making some recommendation and the business leader side of things just ignore it completely?
Yeah, that happens a lot. Generally what I say, though, is that is a failure from the IT company to explain to the business leader the why. The business leader does not understand the why. They're in too much of the minutia of the how or the what. You know, hey, it's a shiny new tool. You need the shiny new tool because it's going to do whatever. They don't understand why what the risk is that the shiny new tool is going to fix for them, or what the hole in their system that the shiny new tool is going to do. And so it's really kind of a failure. Generally, when I see that, it's a failure of the IT company to adequately explain in normal human terms, talking to a business leader about what does this mean for your organization and why should you actually do this, and what outcome are we looking to achieve from doing this type of thing here.
Gotcha. So you know, if you've been following us and watching our podcast, you already understand why it's so important for your business leaders to have an open relationship with your IT team and communicate with them on a regular basis. In fact, you know, what are some good questions that just for starters, let's say, there's a business owner, he's an 8-person construction company, and he doesn't really talk to his IT team. What's the first thing that he should do? Like, how does he go about that conversation to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing?
Yeah, so really what I would look for is say, okay, if certain aspects of my technology went down, how would that hurt me? And if you don't understand that as a business owner, you need to kind of figure out how to get on top of that. So if a hacker got access to your email with a business email compromise, what could they do from there and how could they make that hurt you? Could they steal money? Could they sign up new accounts? Could they do things like that? Could they defraud your customers? Could they do things like that? Because we see business email compromise. It's been massively on the rise over the last 2 years. It's one of the biggest scourges of the industry right now is where somebody takes over your email account. What could happen from that? So that's an outcome, right? What is the outcome that I'm looking to achieve of keeping somebody out of my email or detecting when if I can't keep them out wholesale, how do I detect that they're there and get them kicked out before they've been able to do something materially bad? That's what you want to know from your IT company. Okay, so I have an outcome. I've now understood that somebody could get access to my email account. It's very hard to protect it fully to make sure that nobody bad ever gets into it. Okay, what can be done if they do get access? How quickly can you get them kicked out? How quickly can you detect that some nefarious behavior is happened and then respond and recover that before something bad happens? You then look through all the different things that have to do with the 3 pillars. And so you say, hey, what if somebody got access to an endpoint? What if my server went down? What if X, Y, and Z, right? What if these things happen? How would that materially affect my business? And what are we doing to protect from that? And not from an aspect of like, oh, we have a bunch of tools and they do whatever. Like, no, it's not just tools. It's about how all the tools work together. It's about how those sorts of things. And I can point to any of my companies, and if they were to ask me, hey, John, what are you doing to mitigate business email compromise and how would it materially affect me? Okay, here's what's happening. This is the risk that you're carrying. This is how long the dwell time we've seen on average of somebody getting in before it gets detected and booted out. And then this is the risk that you're carrying. The remediation for that to limit it to the next step is going to be more money to do so, and it's going to cause some potential hardship on your employees for their operations. That's a weighing factor that you can do on those sorts of things. If you're not having those kind of conversations with your IT, I would have a pretty big question of what they're really actually doing for you.
Yeah, and that was going to be kind of my question is, can we prove that we're secure as possible, or do we just assume we are? It's always a good starting point. I mean, there's a lot of different frameworks you can align with, and so if you're asking your IT company, what framework are we aligning with, they can tell you. I mean, there's no secret. I mean, they're all listed. Yeah, there shouldn't be.
If they're aligning with a framework, there shouldn't be. Like we align with basically 2 different frameworks. We align with the NIST cybersecurity framework, but we really highly align with the CIS controls about what we do here. And most of what we deliver is within alignment with the CIS controls. But there's pieces of that have to do that are responsible from the companies that we work with. There's things that we can't 100% do. Like, I don't know what the data is that sits on your shared drive. Like, I don't know what sensitive data you have out there, so I can protect it to a certain level. But if, like, hey, that data needs to be segmented in a different way for different access, that's partially on you giving us that information. If you bring a new computer online at your organization and you haven't told us, is that technically our responsibility to fix, right? These are some pieces that we have these conversations with the companies to make sure, like, hey, do they know what their responsibility is from an IT perspective and a cybersecurity perspective? When you look for alignment with one of these frameworks and your IT guy tells you something, we've seen a lot of times where it's just vibes, right? Like, they're not really aligned with anything, and they've kind of just made it up as they went along and bought tools off the shelf, and they don't really know how they work together. But at the end of the day, honestly, still to this day, mostly on the companies that I audit, I'm just seeing a spam filter, an EDR-style antivirus, and firewall with the security services turned on. That's what I see across the board.
A lot.
All the companies that I've seen have full encryption events. They had those things. That's not enough today. And if that's the floor, and I still see companies that are worse than that, or they don't even have that across the board. I see all kinds of things. It's the Wild West out there. And so it's really, you're as strong as your weakest link. If you have an endpoint that's sitting on the network that has access to everything that doesn't have one of those tool sets on it, I mean, that's, you're not even protected from that minimal protection, and they should be doing 7 or 8 layers past that.
Absolutely.
At that point in 2026.
Yeah, so if you haven't got that conversation started with your IT team, get it started and start asking them some questions, guys. It's only to protect yourself. John, anything else you want to add about this topic before we go?
Yeah, guys, I mean, those are going to be hard questions. Those are going to be hard topics, because you're going to likely, if they are doing everything, then great. It's hard to verify that it actually is. We have ways to show what we actually do for cybersecurity. We have ways to talk about not just like, oh yeah, we're doing it for you. No, we'll break it down exactly how this all works together in our methodologies for things, as much or as little as you want to understand. And it's going to be hard questions, but when you talk about the buck stops here, that thought leadership that comes down from the business leadership, like, hey, I do a lot of the operations and running of Forbes. What comes from James and I really set the tone for the organization. If you're setting that tone that cybersecurity is important for you as an organization, then you will end up carrying less cyber risk because the employees see that. They know that they're going to be more careful and do those sorts of things. But at the end of the day, you're one button click away from somebody just making an honest mistake and getting fooled. The hackers are good at this. AI is making them better at it. There's less mistakes. Like they can fool people into business email compromise or any of these types of things these days. And so how do you mitigate that? How do you make it so that it doesn't hurt your organization as much as something like that happens? That needs to be something that you say, okay, well, I'm no longer going to take a back seat in my cybersecurity and just say, yeah, that guy's got it. Everything's taken care of. How is it being taken care of? What are we at risk of? What are the outcomes that would happen if this thing happened? How would we respond? How would we detect that this thing happened and then respond and recover from that scenario? And then look for your IT guys to help you with that sort of thing. They should be able to say, hey, here's the things the holes that we have in the system, right? And that might be a decision based on risk that, hey, the financial risk of my company outlaying the cash to cover this and taking money away from something else does not work with the actual risk of this happening, and we don't want to pay for it right now. But you've made that decision from an informed space.
Right.
You haven't done it on vibes. You haven't done it out of just not knowing. And then you can actually make a realistic risk-based decision on that and say, hey, maybe this is something that we don't want to do now, but we might want to plan for it in the future if the hacking behavior changes.
Absolutely. And we'll be talking more about risk appetite in our next episode. So if you ever are looking for a second opinion, definitely reach out to us. And as always, make sure you like and subscribe and follow us for more information so you stay up to date. John, I appreciate you coming.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Uninterrupted, a podcast from Forbes Cybersecurity. We hope you walked away with practical insights to protect your business and stay ahead of the latest cyber threats. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share with your colleagues. For more tips, resources, and cybersecurity updates, visit Forbes.com, that's 4bis.com, and follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook. We'll be back soon with another episode, so stay vigilant and stay uninterrupted.